This is Movie Tone. Leslie Mitchell reporting. She was one of the famous windjammers and one of the very last. Now, caught in a hurricane in mid-Atlantic on passage from Buenos Aires to Hamburg, she's gone down with heavy loss of life. For 50 years, the Pamir sailed the seas, racing home to Europe with grain from Australia and, in her old age, as a German training ship. At the end, tragedy overtook her as the last faint signals of distress echoed round the world. Sails gone, foremast broken by heavy seas, in danger of sinking. Then, after hope had almost been abandoned, a number of survivors from her complement of over 80 were picked up.
What a sad and tragic conclusion to one of the world's last commercial sailing ships. The magnificent four-masted steel-hull Basque had travelled this route on dozens of occasions. 52 years on the seas, ending on September the 21st, 1957, about 1,100 kilometres southwest of the Azores. Many of the Pamir's crew of 86 on that fateful day were cadets on their first voyage. This is a photo of the survivors. Just 6. She had, after all, endured far worse conditions in the past. So what caused the Pamir to sink? The vessel had a special place in many hearts around the world. New Zealanders would be one of those mourning the vessel's lost and wanting an answer from the subsequent inquiry being held in Germany. Before we deal with the likely reason, let's go back to 1905 and her construction at Hamburg at the yards of Blohm & Voss, their most famous ship being the Bismarck. That's the launching. She was number 5 of 8 almost identical vessels built by the German shipping company Ferdinand Leis, primarily for the bulk movement of nitrate from South America into Europe. A trip from, say, Hamburg to Valparaiso, Chile would take roughly 65 days, cruising at 10 knots or about 20 kilometres per hour. Now, to the other specs. 115 metres long, those masts were 50 metres high. And to give you some perspective as to size, here are 2 photos of her moored to the wharf. London and Littleton, NZ. The crew, well, normally there'd be between 28 and 35. You'd be right in thinking a lot of young cadets perished. What else did she carry besides nitrate? Wheat, cement, wool and nail wire, to mention but a few. Did she have an engine? Yes, she was fitted with an engine in 1951, a 900 horsepower Corrupt. I'm not a technically minded person, but when it comes to a compatible engine specs, I remember somewhere in my brain my Subaru is about 155 brake horsepower. So for a vessel with 4,500 deadweight tonnage capacity, that sounds extremely underpowered to this landlubber. The ownership history of the Pamir is a long and winding one, starting and ending in Germany. Wikipedia on your screen sums this up succinctly. You'll see it's German owners ceded ownership to the Italian government as war reparations in World War I. In 1920, the Pamir was unceremoniously towed from Hamburg to close to Naples, where the Italians found they had a problem. They didn't have enough crew with the expertise to actually sail her. It wasn't as if the Pamir played any role in World War I either. For the entirety, she was holed up in the Canarian Islands off Morocco. Then you'll spot a similar occurrence in World War II, at which point she was now Finnish-owned. Let me sum up Finland in World War II for you. After being initially invaded by Russia in the winter of 39-40, in which the gallant Finns bogged down the far larger Russian forces, They were forced to cede territory. They fully re-engaged in regaining their lost territory with the German assistance as a part of Operation Barbarossa. Since June the 16th, 1941, Finland was now nominally part of the Axis, and her next port of stop for that vessel just happened to be Wellington, New Zealand. Her inbound trips to New Zealand saw her carrying guano from the Seychelles. Five days after arriving into New Zealand in 1941, the Pamir was seized by the government, Finland now being considered an enemy belligerent. 2 years into the war, New Zealand as a trading nation was desperate for ships of any kind to undertake commercial trade. The Pamir was handed over to the Union Steamship Company with a part original and part New Zealand crew, and undertook 10 voyages under the New Zealand ensign, Wellington becoming her home port for the next 7 years. Most of her export voyages were with wool and tallow to San Francisco and Vancouver. That's a fab shot of her going under the Golden Gate. One trip to Vancouver was made in the rather impressive 48 days. There was also a voyage on which she was spotted by a Japanese submarine in the Pacific. There are 2 stories as to how that meeting ended. The one where the Pamir saw the threat and evaded the ship by some crafty tacking, and the other where the captain of the sub took one look at the vessel in front of him through the periscope and decided not to waste a torpedo. Frankly, I could have done an hour-long video on this and never touched the sides with all the stories. The intern crew were also caught up in the seizure, and they weren't all finished. Swedes and Danes were also placed in the same bag. Officially they were under arrest, but they soon found gainful employment, integrated into Kiwi society, and certainly weren't considered to be the enemy. Those who were not out crewing the vessel ended up on shore with jobs from construction through to barman. Pictured is the Dane, Sven Andersen, consorting with his future wife, Jean Burns, in December of 1941. Sven died in Wellington in 2015, aged 94. Jean Andersen passed away the year earlier. Sven was one of 2 crew who married a Kiwi girl. On her return trip to Finland after the war, she and her sister, the Passat, got to work for a couple of years before their futures appeared rather bleak. Don't worry, I thought a trade winds, i.e. Passat, was a silly term for a car as well. In 1951, they were due to be broken up, and then they suddenly received a reprieve from death by becoming both training vessels. So why did it sink? Well, other theories exist to today, but the good money is on her load not being trimmed, that's to say balanced, when the 4,000 tonnes of barley was loaded in Buenos Aires. That port at the time had a wharfies strike, and the departure had already been delayed by weeks. The Pamir was fatally loaded in a hurry. This and the storm saw her sink when the load moved. We also know the Passat also nearly had the same thing occur to her only 3 weeks later, when her load similarly shifted in rough weather. And there is, however, a great ending to this one. Remember I mentioned the Pamir had sister ships? Well, 3 of them sailed the seas, or at least survive till today. The Passat is one I've already just touched on. She's a museum ship parked up near the northern German city of Ludwig. And this is the Peking, and I've actually seen her. She's moored outside the German Marine Ministry in Hamburg, and that's ironically directly across the harbour, or the Hafen, from where she was built in 1911. The now Kronenstern was originally the Padua when she was nabbed by the Russians at the end of World War II. Her home port is Kaliningrad. Far from being a static display, she's a popular attraction at regattas all around the world. Sailed by cadets, she circumnavigated the globe twice in the last 20 years and is featured in heaps of movies. These remaining windjammers will outlast you and me. Here are some great photos of a great vessel with strong ties to a lot of cities. here's that list. Now let's take a look at some assorted photos of the Pamir, some of which don't need explanation. Feast your eyeballs. That's Mrs. Kiwis on board in 1947. Once graced the cover of Australian Woman's Weekly. The names of her sails. Example 1 is the Flying Jib, 18 is the Main Royal, and 21 is the Cross Jack. Suspiciously lurks in the background of this New Zealand stamp from 1947. Letters posted from the Falkland Islands. And even Sierra Leone has a crack. And lastly, if you want to watch a German film that includes a downfall without a dictator in a bunker, there's a movie to check out, and it's available here on YouTube. It's just a quick shout out. The viewing hours and subscriptions are what feeds the voracious YouTube algorithm. So thanks very much for those that support my spare room project. I hope to see you here next time for more interesting things from NZ. Bye for now.